Well, hello there, and welcome to another video about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm your FileMaker instructor, bringing you FileMaker tutorials over at FileMakerMagazine.com. Now, I'm excited to bring you this video because this is going to show you some stuff that you probably have not seen anywhere else since FileMaker 12 has been released. It's some stuff that I've figured out that if somebody else has figured it out before me, then you beat me to it. But I'm going to be the first to show it possibly. Here we go. What we're talking about are paging portals, but this is not just your everyday paging portals. We are navigating portals without scroll bars. Having a portal without a scroll bar that is scrollable is something that came about in FileMaker 12, but it's a hack. You have to hack the CSS, but you don't have to hack the CSS and have a hacked theme, which FileMaker does not promote. You could use, say, for example, my tool, which will be coming out, the Theme Studio for FileMaker 12. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about so I can get you excited first. All right, so here we go. Up in front of us is a copy of my Theme Studio for FileMaker 12. Now, it hasn't changed in terms of the look for the icon screen, and that's where I'm going to be demoing or showing you this. But what we're looking at in particular is we're looking at this area where we scroll. You can see that as I hover, I get a little bit of a highlight. That's something you can do with FileMaker 12's new features. But down here at the bottom, and I'm just going to give you right off the bat, if you're a FileMaker developer and you think you can figure this all out, go for it. What we've got right here is a web viewer. Here we have some standard buttons, and underneath here I have a button which is a hoverable button. But watch what happens as I scroll. Watch this little bar down at the bottom. First of all, make note of the fact that there are no scroll bars on the side. I have turned those off using the CSS. Basically, there is a margin value, and there's also a selector called scroll bar track, where there are two values that you need to set to 0, but it'll basically turn off the scroll bar. This portal is a scrolling portal. It's simply just not showing the scroll bar, and I edited the clipboard CSS in order to make this happen. That is something that will be available, as you can see up here, this tweak section. This is a new area that will be in the 12 version of the Theme Studio, which basically allows you to modify and control all CSS values of any object or objects on the clipboard. Something very cool. But this is what I like. As you scroll, check this out. I don't have the scroll bars, and it's not giving me the OS native little translucent scroll bar. And I haven't tested this on the iOS, as a matter of fact, but you notice that as I scroll, this web viewer is updating, and it's giving me a really nice update. In fact, on really small little groups, let's go to nope, that's got 1,500. Here we've got 80 items. Look at the scroll bar as I hover over. Now, this is a little trick that I sort of figured out. And the other thing I want you to pay attention to is the fact that I've got these little items right here which allow me to page a page at a time. You can see that it's jumping. Now, it will jump according to how high this portal is, no matter whether the window's been resized or not. And that's what I'm going to show you in the remainder of this video. How you actually capture how many total rows there are, what was the last row, and how to get all of this stuff to work. There's also a nice little feature that within Flickr, if you were going to do a horizontal portal, say for example, and you just want to move, like in Flickr, they have this little browser where you click on to move to the next object. Well, in this case, if you click on like 137, it jumps to 138, and then 139, 140. You can see that I'm jumping one row at a time. Anything in between, it does nothing. But if I click here up on the top row, it will move up a row until it gets to 1. So I haven't implemented the UI for the actual click here, but I do have the paging that allows me to page a page at a time. Of course, the scrolling and the scroll bar works, and that's what you probably need to get excited about, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Let's take a look. So the first thing that you need to know, if you don't already, if you've been working with FileMaker for some time, then you know that FileMaker does not give us it doesn't give us many events that we're able to actually take control of. In other words, when we scroll up and down a portal using the mouse, FileMaker does not give us an event that says, as the user is scrolling, evaluate this or do something else. Well, this is the first little trick that we have here. You notice that as I hover, that the scroll bar itself, looking down here, this little scroll bar, watch as I hover, and this little scroll bar will move by little pixel increments each time that I hover over a particular object. You can see that that scroll bar is hovering slightly, and what it's doing is it's adjusting based on what this web viewer is rendering by the mere fact that a hover event is being executed. Because in FileMaker, FileMaker 12, we now have these different events that while we don't have control programmatically of when the user hovers, what it does do is it forces a re-evaluation of FileMaker's calculation engine and obviously a redisplay of the UI. So that's a key thing to know, because if I select on this object here in the back of this portal with no scroll bars, if you take a look at the normal state, you can see right now the fill is none. If I switch to the hover state, you can see that I now have a gradient. I'm basically going from white to white, but this white is actually 100% opaque. Or excuse me, it's clear. You can see through it. That's because this actual portal, when I formatted this portal using my tweak tool within the Theme Studio, I put this background gradient directly on the row itself. It is part of the portal. You can see right here, each row that's represented, it has the gradient embedded into the actual portal row. So I don't have an overlaid object in order to get this gradient effect on each of the rows. Very cool. And you can do this for each alternating row, but that's another topic for another video. The key thing is the fact that because FileMaker needs to interpret the hover event and redraw or re-render, that's what's going to trigger our web viewer to update its contents because of that evaluation alone, which is a cool thing to know. The next thing that you need to know is how do you actually decide, or how do you know what is the total row count and what is the last row that was actually viewed? Well, that again is controlled by this exact same object. In fact, you can see that I have a merge field right here in FileMaker 12 where it's actually showing the record number. In FileMaker's 11 and earlier, all the way back to when they integrated merge values, there was a small set of them. They were these right here: date, time, user, page, record, etc. When you go to other symbol, it's now FileMaker 12 is now giving you access to all, not all, but the majority of the get functions. I haven't tested whether it's all, but record number is one of them. It used to be the @ sign. Now what that's going to do is when there is conditional formatting on this particular object, which I have defined as a button. In fact, if I double click this, you can see that the button that it's defined as is to simply go to portal row, and the portal row that it's going to go to is it's going to use the get active portal row. So in other words, if the user clicks this, just go to my own row, because we're simply using this object for the purpose of being able to put a change in the CSS or a different appearance value on the hover versus the normal. That's going to force the calculation to reevaluate, which forces the web viewer to update. Very cool. We're also using it in order to get the value of the record number using the self function within conditional formatting. This is where we can capture a lot of cool values. So let's take a look at conditional formatting. It's this one right here, and I will tab and I will bring this code on screen. Here's where a lot of the magic is happening. And what's cool is you can do this for all portals for your whole solution, and then you can make some scripts very generic in terms of what they do, as we're going to see. So in this conditional formatting, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm using a let function in order to assign a lot of global variables. The result of the let function is simply false, meaning no matter what you set within the conditional formatting, it simply won't be applied because I'm returning a result of false. The only reason I'm using this conditional formatting is merely for the purpose of the evaluation of the conditional formatting each time a new row is brought into view when the portal is scrolled. And what happens is each of these values are being set. So the icon.portal.row.last is set to evaluate self. What is self? It is simply the record row. It is the current portal row that is being shown. So in other words, it's the last portal row that's being shown. So how do we get the actual total count of rows? Well, you can see right here I'm specifying an internal variable of the name of the object. The name of the object is the portal itself. It's called portal icons is what I've named it. I also have an embedded object of the actual thing that I have selected right now, or the conditional formatting. That happens to be named row.number. Now that's not absolutely required in here. I've only left it in here as part of what I had in here for testing purposes, and that's because I was actually getting the row value because it is the full height of the row, and then using the getLayoutObject attribute, and I was pulling the height value off of that. But then I sort of thought about it. I don't need to pull the height value because as soon as I set my portal to whatever height that is on the actual layout, the row height is never going to change. It is a static value. So I decided to use the fixed value of row height and just set that statically to whatever it is. It simply avoids yet another call to FileMaker's calculation engine. And anytime you can avoid calls to the calculation engine, that means that your layout is left to be more faster than if it has to make those calls. So everything in between here actually isn't used in the solution. Actually, here, what I should select everything right here. This row top and the row bottom, those were using the getLayoutObject attribute. You can see they were referencing that. In fact, I should comment those out. As I just stated, I would want to make a savings on these calls to the calculation engine. There's no sense in making these calls. But I left them in here so that you can see that there are things that you can do, such as try to get the low height and try to get the high height of all of the different rows that are showing. But in this technique, the only things that are being used are the portal top, the portal bottom, and then this row count. And the row count is basically saying what is the portal bottom and the portal top, and then divide that by the row height. And it turns out actually I didn't even need to do all of this. I can actually use the getLayoutObject attribute, look at the portal itself, and pass in the height value, like that. But for some reason I did the top and the bottom in order to get this. It's just good to know that you can do the math here in order to get this. So we'll save this and we'll take a look at what's going on using my desk scribble. So here's what we have to know in order to figure this out. There is a value right here, which is the top, and the top, let's say, is simply 100. Here's your basic math, and then there is the bottom of the portal row, and let's say that happens to be at 500. So the difference between 500 minus 100 leaves us with 400. And then for grins, we're going to say that the absolute height of each portal row, instead of the 98 that I have it at, is 100. So what's 400 divided by 100? Well, that's simply 4. So I have 4 rows showing if that was the actual math or that was the situation. And what's really nice about this is because conditional formatting evaluates each time that it's brought onto screen, when this window is resized, or as the user grabs and resizes the portal itself, provided it's anchored, you of course get a modification in all of these values. So what happens is your values now are accessible in the rest of your scripting. So as we head back to FileMaker and go into browse mode, when I'm scrolling here, I'm getting the updated because of the hover. If I click on this object down at the bottom, right down here, these page up and down, because I took the scroll bars off and because a scroll bar is not being rendered, a person with a 1 or 2 button mouse without a scroll wheel would have no way to go up and down. I can get up and down because I've got this nice Mighty or Magic Mouse, whichever one it is, with the nice glass top that allows me to scroll. But somebody without this would not. So I had to give them this ability to be able to page through this information. And I wanted to show the update. The up is not going to work because you can see over here my scroll bar is actually the size of my whole layout is not able to be shown on the resolution that I'm recording at, which is 720 pixels high, when the resolution of this layout is 800 high, I believe. So that's my problem with going up. But you can see when we take a look at the script, when I double click on this, you can see that my script is simply named Page Portal. And this allows me to have one script for the whole solution, because everything that's being passed into the script just simply says what is the portal object name that I'm working with, and what is the target row that you want me to go to. That's essentially what this script is saying. So I have an object parameter that's required and a row parameter, and everything that's being passed inside is all of the math. So if we take a look at the specification for this object using my code editor, we can see that again I'm just doing basic math, and you just simply change it depending on whether you're on the up or whether you're on the down. So in this case, on this particular portal, on this layout, which it'll be different on a different layout, I need to know what is the total number of rows. I'm using the count function, getting a count of my portal icons, looking at the key value, always a really good value to look at because you know it's always going to be there. What is the last row that the user was on? Well, here we've got simply that value that was evaluated within the conditional formatting. And here is a tip. For those developers that haven't watched the video, you can get frustrated because the get properties or the get layout attribute, for some reason they sometimes seem to pass things in as text. So it's always good to wrap a get as number anytime you're going to do mathematical operations on values using that get layout object attribute. I don't know that it pushes in as a number, but if you use this coercion function, you always know that you're working with numbers. Rows shown is simply going to get the total row count, and from there everything else is easy. We establish a pass line, which is basically the total number of rows, either plus or minus. In this case, because we're either going up or down, I forget which one it is, we subtract, and then we have a target row. And we say if the last row that was being viewed, if it's greater than the pass line, then we're going to go all the way to the bottom of the total number of rows. Otherwise, we're simply going to go to the last plus the total number of rows shown, which is if we're showing 5 rows, we're going to jump by 5 rows. If we're showing 8 rows, we're going to jump by 8 rows. All of that is captured in with the conditional formatting. And here are the two inbound parameters. Object, which is the portal I'm working with, and row, which is my target row. And that is simply all there is to it in order to do all this magically looking cool stuff. So that I can scroll and I got this nice web viewer that's updating. Although I will show you the web viewer, and I'll show you the up and down. The up and down you can see right here where I haven't implemented a UI for clicking up and down. Simply goes to the previous row. That's a real simple script. All it does is it goes to the previous and goes to the next and then bumps back. Here you can see it's the portal row advanced, and in this situation what I'm doing is I'm passing in all of the objects. I don't want to rely on those global variables. What I want to rely on is I want to rely on what is clicked. So again, when I click on an actual row, I can pass in the get active portal row. And that's what I want to pass in instead of relying on the global variables that are set according to this conditional formatting. So if we take a look at scripts and we look at the advanced and we see right here, you can see that all I'm doing within this top group is I'm passing in all of those values, but I'm passing them in using that get layout object attribute. I'm coercing it to make sure that it's a number, and then from here I'm either going to the top row or I'm going on the bottom row. And you can see that it's the same thing, it's just inversed. I go to the previous row, go to a field, and then go to the next row. And that's all this is in order to advance all of these different rows when you're in browse mode and you're clicking. If you're on a row mat and clicking to advance to the next row, or if I'm clicking a page at a time, or if I'm scrolling. And the web viewer is the last thing that you need to know about. The web viewer also is using that value. All of this hinges on that conditional formatting and getting those values into those global variables. But here in the web viewer, when we take a look at this code, you're going to see that I am using the same CSS that FileMaker is using, FileMaker 12, in order to render. In this case, because I'm in a web viewer, I am passing a data URL to make the web viewer render the local content, meaning it's not going out to the internet or on the local network and getting a result. It's actually going to render the HTML that I pass in. I'm passing all the HTML in within a list variable. I am using CSS in order to define on the HTML and body all of these values, a margin of 0, a height of 100%, meaning goes all the way to the top and bottom. Background color transparent, really don't need that, but I am passing in a background variable, which is using this WebKit gradient, exact same as what FileMaker 12 is using. Now, one thing I would like to point out, useful bit of information, Safari 4, probably about the time that FileMaker was integrating support for CSS, used this version of the WebKit gradient, but this is not the current version of Safari 5's implementation of gradients. I believe they made it something like, it's now they've got linear, it's like WebKit radial gradient versus WebKit linear gradient, whereas the Safari 4 version supported what type of gradient it was within its actual parameters. So I used that here because obviously it will be backwards compatible within Safari 5, but this is also it is the way that FileMaker is using its internal gradients as well. And then I implemented a gradient for the actual scroll bar, which the scroll bar is simply just a div being rendered in there with a width value, and the width value is dynamic, and this whole calculation again is reevaluated by the mere fact that FileMaker is forcing the calculation to reevaluate and therefore the web viewer to update based on that simple hover that I have on each and every row, which makes the scrolling with the mouse look really cool, as we already saw. But here it is again. You can see that I'm simply referencing one of those global variables that was set as a result of that conditional formatting, where here I'm getting the full amount of what's being shown within the portal currently using a count. I get the current, where I'm currently at, using the portal row last, my global variable. I need to know how wide is this web viewer in order to actually represent the div in a percentage of the total width of the web viewer. So the web viewer itself has to have an actual object name. In this case, I called it webview.progress. I'm getting the width value from the getLayoutObject attribute, and then what I'm going to display, which is transferred right into the CSS width value, is basically again doing a round, taking the overall bar width of the web viewer and then dividing that by the full amount of what I'm showing divided by currently where I'm at. And that's pretty much all there is to it. That is what is making all of this coolness work, so that I support this nice scrolling with updating, the nice paging as I go through. Of course, darn it, that up. I wish that up worked, but I don't have the whole height here. And being able to click on actual rows and going to the next row. All of this stuff is cool. I have not yet tested it within FileMaker Go, but I have every inclination that it will probably work in Go as well, making this for very nice UI display solutions, both on the desktop and within Go. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, gotten a little bit more understanding about what you can and can't do within FileMaker. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.